OpenAI releasing a sweeping policy blueprint today on how the government should handle the surge in productivity that artificial intelligence might bring.
The blueprint, titled Industrial Policy for the Intelligence Age, lays out some sweeping proposals like these: a public wealth fund, 4-day work weeks, a new tax code that taxes capital, not labor, affordable AI access for all, and government coordination to control potential rogue artificial intelligence.
Joining us now is Fox News contributor, former Miami mayor, and AlphaWave global president, Francis Suarez. Mayor, it's good to have you on the show tonight. Okay, now I don't know where you stand on this. I'm very curious. I look at OpenAI's proposal, and I appreciate the creative thinking, I guess, but it sounds like an awful lot of government control and government hands in the economy in this new artificial intelligence age. I get nervous about that. How do you feel about it?
Well, Brian, I understand why you get nervous. This entire proposal is set to, I think, give some direction to government. We saw during the crypto years that unfortunately government was completely incapable of regulating crypto or getting ahead of the crypto phenomenon, mainly because a lot of the public officials didn't really understand the technology. Maybe OpenAI is trying to have a broader conversation, not just with policymakers, but also with the public, understanding that many people in the public may not even be aware completely of what the capability of some of these systems are. I think there's a delta between what some of these systems can do and what people actually think they can do. And I think the other part is that as we embark on this sort of uncertain future, and the policy paper itself says that they don't really have a lot of answers, they're not sure what the future holds, they don't know how many jobs will be disrupted. As we embark on that future, they want to start having a conversation so that people are aware and not caught by surprise when they see the power of these tools, or when certain things may happen, like the fact that some people may be able to use the tools and gain wealth faster than others, and sort of things that have happened in the past with the advent of technology. Wealthier people create more wealth, and people who maybe don't have the understanding of some of these technologies struggle a little bit more.
You're right, Mayor. There's certainly a learning curve here, and I think every industry will be impacted differently. And as we're talking about kind of policies that are rolling out, let's talk about what the White House has recently introduced, because they have their own AI framework. They want to create one national standard for artificial intelligence, and they really want to end or stop states from enacting their own individual standards. They don't want a patchwork of various state policies that could impede on kind of the progress of artificial intelligence. California is an example. Governor Newsom kind of bucked what the White House wanted, recently signed his own executive order. What do you make of this? Are you concerned about a patchwork of different standards emerging? Should the federal government lead on this?
I would absolutely be concerned about a patchwork of regulation. I think the federal government should lead. It should be uniform. You want to have a country that is leading on innovation. The best chance that we have to continue to be prosperous, the best chance that we have to be a great country, is to lead in the era of the digital and intellectual economy. So I think for America, the best thing is not to have certain states enact their own laws, which could be contrary to the national policy. It could be contrary to the common good. I think that for our children, it's better that way. And when you look at things that are going to power AI, like data centers, you want to make sure that there's a national framework for that as well, so that you don't have states that are antagonistic to the very technology that's going to continue to allow us to be the most prosperous country on earth.
I want to move on to this, Mayor. Two progressives in the House, Pramila Jayapal and Jonathan Jackson, spent their Easter recess in Cuba. Landing back in the U.S., they have nothing but complaints about the oil blockade, saying, quote, "This is cruel collective punishment, effectively an economic bombing of the infrastructure of the country that has produced permanent damage. It must stop immediately." What do you think of the pressure that the Trump administration is putting on the regime in Cuba right now?
I think it's a generational opportunity to free the Cuban people. When you realize where immigration pressure to the United States comes from, it comes from poverty in our hemisphere. And that is perpetuated by the Cuban government and its continuous propagation of communist ideologies throughout this hemisphere in our entire lifetime. So I think it's sad that a couple of Democratic federal elected officials will go for a junket to Cuba and be so easily fooled by the Cuban government that knows exactly what they're doing, how to brainwash a country, not only a country, but anyone who can be there for a short period of time. And just today, we saw the news that a Russian tanker entered Cuba with 730,000 barrels of oil. So that's not even true. It's really sad, and I hope that the United States takes this generational opportunity to free Cuba, but not only to free Cuba, but to free the hemisphere of this fraudulent ideology that has enslaved so many people and that continues to create tremendous amounts of immigration pressure on our country.
Well, Mayor, we really appreciate you joining us. You previously mayor inside the great state of Florida, so we know that you understand the dynamics there in the region better than anyone else. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Good to see you, sir. Thanks.
Thank you both.